Okay, so Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to appear on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
So, for people who don't know who you are, which will be a surprise, but could you just give us a brief overview of who you are and what it is you do at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Mike Molloy, and I am the owner and founder of M2 Performance Nutrition. It's something that started off as really a hobby of mine that grew into a brand new career. We work with, a wide diversity of different types of clients, all the way from, CrossFit Games champions. We worked with both Haley Adams, Dallin Pepper, Stephanie Waugh, other people on the podium, all the way down to people that are just literally looking to be healthier in their life, that maybe their form of exercise is 3 days a week doing some workouts at home and going for walks. And so that's the breadth of people that we work with, and our real goal is not anything other than trying to make their lives better in whatever way they choose. And ultimately, I say we try to produce happiness. That's really what our end goal is, whether that's a physical change or a mental change. Is really client dependent, but at the end of the day, we want to make people just happier in their lives.
Yeah, and as you said, it's that can be down to both. Well,
Yeah,
either body comp, or it can be down to, as you said, relationship with food and mental side of things. And
100%, completely. Some people it's performance, and some people it's abs, and some people it's, I want to figure out a way to, make a sustainable nutrition change where I'm not binge eating anymore.
Mhm.
And all three of those are goals that are completely worth, striving for, and something that we've successfully helped people with. And it's been just an absolutely incredibly rewarding experience to meet such really cool people along the way.
Yeah, great. So you said that it was a hobby of yours that grew into a business. So when did you start, and what
Sure.
what took you down that journey?
Yeah. So I've been in the CrossFit community since about 2008, 2007.
Okay.
Um, back when there was literally, I think one affiliate in all of like the New England region that where we live, um, and it's such an exciting time to be doing things and competing at, regionals and sectionals, which was a thing for a while.
Mhm.
And I wanted to take my own performance to another level. And so, I have a background in research. I'm a PhD level biologist. And so I said, hey, there's research, there's publications on this, not necessarily for CrossFit, but for other performance-based sports. Let's see what I can apply to my own life. And so, you know, reasonably successfully applied some approaches there, and other people started to ask me about things, how to do nutrition in their own lives. I gave some seminars at, CrossFit facilities, which led to a handful of clients. And, through the amazing CrossFit community, got, to know more and more people. And eventually this thing sort of began to tip. I did an athlete camp with Jason Leiden, and then another one with a guy named Brandon Peterson, where I met Tasia Persevich, who's now, CrossFit Mayhem, two-time champion, relatively famous athlete within the community. So she and I met, 5 years ago. And, through working together and all of her own hard work, she really blew up on the scene, which led to Mackenzie Riley, Carly Feuer, Nicole Holcomb, Haley Adams, just more and more athletes that, started to kind of post within the social media world. And then the community kind of expanded from there. And so, at the time I was doing, basic research, immunology and microbiology, gut health, and things like that, and sort of managing a small client list on the side. And next thing you knew, we had, 500 clients and building plans for 1,000 people a year. And so what started off as sort of like something that I enjoyed doing became a career that, dominated everything else. And sort of at some point I said, hey, this is what I want to do. This is what my passion really is.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, a side job that became my everyday, day in and day out life that I love.
Yeah, and it grew very much organically, as you said there, just with word of
100%.
mouth. And
It was all organic. I think we've probably done like maybe 3 Instagram ads, which failed miserably. And so
right.
everything, everything that we've done and all the growth that we've had is really just from word of mouth and people having positive experiences with either me or with the team of coaches that I have that, are all trained underneath me.
Yeah, I mean that's the best way,
Yeah.
really, which is great.
Complete-
So,
complete.
with CrossFit, then, I mean, it's such a new sport, isn't it? Because really, it's only been going on for as a sport since the evolution of the games, and before then, very much just a health and fitness regime.
Completely.
So, as you said, you took the research that you'd been reading to apply it to yourself. And so I guess most of the research with carbohydrate in sport is mainly in endurance sports.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are based really in the endurance world. Cycling seems to be really popular and things like that.
Mm.
But I was looking, uh, this is a good while back now, but I went looking for things like Wingate tests, which are sort of like this. For those that don't know, basically you get on a bike, and over time the resistance starts to increase as if you were going on a steeper and steeper incline. And you
Mhm.
basically need to maintain the same pace, and at some point you fall off, and that's basically your score. And so that feels an awful lot like a CrossFit workout, like
Yeah.
a really painful one, to be bluntly honest. And so you can look at those types of things. And there's not as many as compared to like bike to exhaustion or run to exhaustion type tests and things like that.
Mhm.
But there were enough out there that I could start to say, okay, you know CrossFit originally started as like an hour-long class with a good amount of skill component, right? So maybe Monday is 5x5 back squat, and then Tuesday is Cindy with a 20 minutes. Wednesday might be something else, an Olympic weightlifting movement or something like that. And their original approach to nutrition, basically the zone at the time, honestly wasn't that far off from something that is literally maybe 20 minutes of legitimate work,
Mhm.
followed by a day of relative activity. But now, within the competitive scene, especially, the amount of volume that was being done, and even nowadays within a typical box where all of a sudden the workout might be 5x5 back squats followed by Cindy, right? And
Yeah.
so the nutritional needs, in my opinion, begin to change as
Yeah.
the community changed what was being produced comparative to CrossFit HQ's, workout of the day.
Mhm.
So, I said, okay, there's not a lot of carbohydrates being supported here from the nutritional side from, traditional CrossFit. But everything that I'm reading says these are so important for the types of workouts that we're doing. These are predominantly glycogen based, workouts.
Mhm.
We need to do way more of these things. And at the time, I'm going out there and talking to communities that have been hearing paleo all day, every day, right? And there was some pushback for sure. People looking at me like really strange. And I'm like, just give me 1 month. Like it's literally 0.1% of your life. I promise you're not going to feel worse. Like carbs are not the enemy. And so, that was sort of where things started. The research came from as close as I could find to CrossFit workouts, and then
Sure.
extrapolating to this new sport, like you said, like a totally new training modality at the time.
Mhm. Yeah, which is great because, as you said, you were looking at the research that reflected the power output and intensity of CrossFit metabolic conditioning, essentially. And then,
Yes.
as you said, in terms of the volume of a session, we know that CrossFitters work pretty hard all of the time. So it comes down to more of a how many hours a week, I guess, are you training in
Yeah,
this style of work?
exactly. And I think, from a nutritional point of view, nutrition coaching point of view, it's important to try to understand your athlete's true training, right, as much as you possibly can,
Yeah.
and understanding even the biases within the box that they're training at, right? So some boxes, there's a lot more 20-30 minute metabolic conditioning pieces, and
Mhm.
some boxes it's really strength focused, right? And those two different types of trainings can actually dramatically impact the amount of nutritional the caloric output that's happening and the nutritional input that's necessary to compensate for that, right? If
Mhm.
you have a strength bias in your training, well, most of your calories at that point are coming from things like non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the thermic effect of food, and of course, for everybody, basal metabolic rate. You know, Compared to that to, let's say, somebody that's doing 2 hours of training a day, where maybe 30 minutes of it is strength, 30 minutes conditioning, or we'll say metabolic conditioning, and maybe they're doing an aerobic piece later in the day.
Mhm.
Well, if you take a relatively decent athlete and you ask them how hard is it for them to hold 700 calories on a rower, right? 700 calorie per hour pace on a rower, most of them laugh at you, right? Like, I can do that, no problem, getting right out of bed, with my eyes closed. And I'm like, okay, great. So now think about your caloric demands if you're doing aerobic pieces 4 days a week for anywhere from 45 to 65, 90 minutes.
Mhm.
And then the light bulb starts to click and they're like, oh, I'm like, yeah. So, that piece alone justifies you being well into the 2000 calorie range.
Mhm.
Never mind all the additional training that you're doing. Never mind that you're coaching, 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. And that's a lot of activity.
Mhm.
So this is sort of where the philosophy starts to come from of, know your athlete, know what their exercise looks like, know what the rest of their life looks like, and then apply that to building the best nutritional plan you can for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you said, it's going to be a different thing for someone who's coaching 4 hours a day, training 2 hours a day, compared to someone who's going to 3 classes a week and then looking after their kids for the rest of the day.
Exactly. A fun anecdote, right? So I met this guy through this thing called Power Monkey Camp, which is a great group of people that your listeners should check out.
Yeah.
And he said, "Man, I'm really having trouble, putting on the weight that I want to put on." We looked at his nutrition, and it all looked good for the amount that he was training. And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I own my own gym." And I said, "Great. Do you have a sense of how many steps you're getting on a day-to-day basis?" And we pulled it up on his Apple Watch or something, and the guy was walking 11 miles a day.
Yeah.
It was a big dude, and I was like, "You need 5,000, 6,000 calories." And he's like, "I'm so full all the time." I'm like, "Okay, well then, hire more coaches or get a scooter or something like that." This is why you can't gain weight, because you literally never stop walking.
Yeah, because that's it, isn't it? It's the rule of thermodynamics will always be there. It's a case of, we need to put your calories in the right place. But for so many people, they just under or overestimate their expenditure, unfortunately.
Exactly. It can be hard to do, and I think that's where getting professional advice, either from somebody like a one-on-one coach or a one-time plan or something like that, just to kind of set your get an outside perspective on what you're actually doing, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and it's I guess people they're more likely to be bought into it if they get it from someone specifically that they've paid for and trust, because there's so many things online now that, a question I get all the time is I've tried so many different online calculators and come up with different answers all the time.
Yeah, no, those things are unfortunately mostly garbage, which it pains me to say, because I wish there was an easy, free way to do it, but end of the day, those tend to be not so good.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why it helps, as you said, you need to know them inside and out. You can't just apply an activity multiplier to them and then hope that it brings you the right number.
Exactly. You're exactly right.
It was interesting what you were saying about different nutritional demands based on the type of training, right? You were talking about strength bias versus conditioning biases. And I guess you're talking then purely on the caloric input, but then you've also got, I guess, the amount of carbohydrates are going to differ. So talk to me a bit about that, I guess.
For sure. So, I think the ratio of the macros is probably a sort of secondary or tertiary importance. So for me, the priorities go sleep, making sure that's in a good place, nutritional, total caloric input being in the right spot, with protein, being a very close second to that. And then third is saying, okay, we've got those two things taken care of. Let's get you an ideal macro breakdown. And so, so if somebody's doing a significant amount more work, the amount of protein that they need isn't going to dramatically differ. The fat level, not dramatically differ, maybe a little bit increase just to allow them to eat real foods. But at the end of the day, they're going to need more calories overall. And then they're going to need more of those calories at a ratio level to be coming from carbohydrates.
Yeah.
That's our bias. There's obviously going to be exceptions to the rule where, 1 out of every 10 endurance athletes does better on a ketogenic protocol, right? I'm not going to deny that at all, but everybody wants to be the exception to the rule. And the reality is not everybody can be the 1 out of 10. We always start with what's most likely to be successful and then, go from there. But yeah, so to get back to your question, the type of training will definitely influence the ratio of macronutrients that we prescribe, typically being the longer the training, the more aerobic or cardio based, the more carbohydrates we're going to pack into that. The reality is that if somebody's bodybuilding or even weightlifting, it's not to minimize the effect of that training. It's brilliant. I love it. I do it all the time myself, but the caloric demands of it are just significantly less.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
A really good weightlifting protocol can often look like, a set of 5 squats, wait 3 to 5 minutes before you do another set, and then, snatch, clean and jerk, all those things, super explosive, super demanding, neurologically extraordinarily taxing, but you probably burn more calories loading and unloading the barbell than you do actually lifting the weight in a lot of these situations.
Yeah.
And so that just influences the total calories that these people need comparative to somebody that's riding a bike for 90 minutes.
Yeah, I think that was a great point. As you said, protein doesn't really need to change, because for athletes, you want to keep it at a certain level anyway, based on the research that we have on muscle recovery. And then fats, again, because they're key for hormonal health. It's like you kind of just don't really need to worry about touching them, more or less. And then you're going to bias carbohydrates for performance, because even though weightlifting is less of a caloric demand than aerobic training and metabolic conditioning, it's still going to be a carbohydrate dominant sport because it's fast activity. It's still that same pathway.
Exactly, right. So at the end of the day, your goal with weightlifting is to restore your ATP levels, right? Within your muscles to have that fast action, right? And so if you can have appropriate levels of carbohydrate fueling in your muscles, then the energy is immediately there. It doesn't need to be transported from the liver. You don't need to worry about breaking down fats, converting it, all those different processes. You can just have ATP regenerated in 3 to 5 minutes, based upon basic physiology laws. And so that's sort of where we come from in that. We don't go low carb with those athletes. We don't go super high carb with them. We're just sort of a relatively balanced, somewhere between 30 to 35% protein, somewhere between 30 to 35% fat, somewhere between 30 to 40% carbs. And that's kind of where we live for weightlifters versus, a really elite level CrossFit athlete training 4 hours a day. They may need 20% protein, 25, 30% fat, and 50 to 55% carbohydrates. Yeah. So that's kind of where we just fall in ratios at the end of the day.
Yeah, because the ratios are, in percentage wise, you're looking at more going to be gram per kilo, and it's going to be based on their energy, as you said, and their activity level. So it might be 50-55% carb for a high level CrossFit athlete, but that's because the level of calories are so high that then it's going to be a greater proportion of carbs. So
exactly.
I actually love how the first thing that you brought up in terms of like priorities would be sort of sleep, stress management. And I do see a lot of that in your posts. And so I guess talk to me a little bit about why you put such a big emphasis on lifestyle management.
Yeah. So you can fuel yourself all, optimally as much as you want. If your sleep is garbage, it's all for kind of naught. And, this is something that I've just sort of noticed anecdotally, over the course of my coaching career, but then there's a lot of research out there on this, so let's just take different scenarios. So if you're trying to lose weight, right, you want to lose, become a smaller person. Well, you want most of that to come from body fat and not from muscle mass, right? And so there's really, small but really impactful study where they took a bunch of guys, they put them into a pretty steep calorie deficit. They had one group sleep 8 hours a night, the other group I sleep 5.5.
Yeah.
And they said, how much muscle mass do you lose and how much body fat do you lose? And the guys that slept 8 hours a night essentially lost, 85% fat and just a little bit of muscle mass. And the guys that slept 5.5 hours a night lost almost entirely protein.
Yeah.
Muscle, essentially, excuse me. And so, that's one study. There's other studies that show that, appropriate sleep basically allows for 80% of your weight loss to come from fat, tissue, versus inappropriate sleep that drops to 20%, And so at the end of the day, it's just so important. From a performance point of view, there's just so many studies out there with baseball players, rugby athletes, rowers, bikers, that everything that you do is going to be impactful from a sleep point of view as it relates to how you're able to perform. What it really comes down to for me is, management of your hormones. And so, when you don't sleep appropriately, your body is relatively in a stress state. So increased production of cortisol, a hormone that is essentially responsible for most of your quote stress response. And, cortisol, one, increases muscle, catabolism, right? So the breakdown of muscle. It, induces a mild state of insulin resistance. So you're breaking down your protein to convert it to carbohydrate to use it for an energy source, but your body's in a slightly insulin resistant state, which ultimately is going to lead to some of that being stored as body fat, right? Or your dietary intake of carbohydrate will be stored as fat in that situation as well. Impairs immunity, right? So moving you more in sort of a Th2 sort of inflammatory response for allergies and things like that, and away from fighting viruses and all of the things that you'd want your immune system to do. So on every level of your physiology, sleep is just going to be so impactful. In fact, if your readers had one book to read in 2020, I would say pick up Why We Sleep is by Matthew Walker. Yeah. It's an brilliant book. It'll change your life if you read it. It's a little bit terrifying if you don't sleep more than 7 hours a night. You're going to be like, I'm going to die tomorrow.
Yeah.
You read this book, but it's one of my 5 favorite books after reading it, for sure.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. Yeah, I double that recommendation. I remember reading it and being like, I can never sleep less than 7 hours a night, even if I, even if.
And he actually does a really good podcast with Joe Rogan. Speaking of podcasts, that if you just want the Cliff Notes version of it, 2 hours, listen to that. Wait for Joe Rogan to stop asking about drugs, and then eventually you get to the good stuff. So
Yeah, just fast forward all of those bits, which takes you sort of the first 30 minutes of the podcast. But
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
no,
But yeah,
that's
that answers your question. But sleep is probably the most impactful thing that you can do, regardless of what your goals are. If it's being a better employee, a better husband, wife, father, mother, athlete, losing weight, anything that you want to do in your life, getting 7.5 to 8.5 hours of sleep a night is going to make you better at doing those things.
yeah, no, it's great advice, and it's always one that people don't want to hear. I find that, like, I've often said, like, if you want the magic pill for your results, then sleep is that pill. And they're like, no, there's got to be something else.
Yeah, no, that they unfortunately think they're the exception to the rule again. And the reality is, I can't think of more than a handful of people that don't need more than 6 hours a night, and the ones that do are like Navy SEALs. So you know what I mean, like specifically bred for this sort of thing. So
Yeah, and then years and years of training, and then they're making that choice themselves, aren't they?
yeah.
No, great. I think so. What I'd like to ask then is, when we're talking about nutrition, people constantly ask me, they're like, okay, I want to lose body fat, but I don't want to affect my performance.
Right.
And then I'm talking to them about, depending on the amount of years they've trained, it might be a case of you've got to kind of tackle one hill before the next.
Yeah.
What's your view on it, I guess?
Yeah, you're exactly right that nutritional history is sort of the most important thing, right? So if somebody comes to you and says, I'm eating 1,300 calories a day, training 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and I'm not making progress, there's two potential reasons there. One is that they may be underneath some relatively extreme levels of adaptive thermogenesis, which is a down regulation of your immune system, or of your metabolism beyond what you would expect. Or they're so restricted with their diet that they're binge eating, 1-2 days a week. And so they say they're eating 1,300 calories a day, but 2 days a week, they're actually eating 4,000 calories a day. So, that's one scenario where you've got to sort of say, look, we got to get you out of either this mindset or out of this metabolic state, back to a good place where you can succeed on a, 13, 14, 1,500 calorie diet. This is now where you're miserable, you're not seeing progress, and you're not following the diet realistically most of the time anyway.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the first approach. Now, let's say we have that person back to a metabolic, equilibrium, or they're starting from a good place, right? What are our thought processes there? So there was a really interesting study that came out maybe about a year and a half ago, called the Matador study.
Yes.
Right. And so it has nothing to do with bullfighting.
No. It's a weird title for it, isn't it, really? I thought that.
Right. So basically the concept here is they took two groups of people and they said, I think they were obese men, and they put them into really big calorie deficits, 33. And they said, okay, one group is just going to continually be in a deficit, and the other group, we're going to take it out of a deficit. So 2 weeks of cutting, 2 weeks of metabolic equilibrium. And the important thing is they kept them in equilibrium. They didn't just let them free eat. They said, no, you're going to eat exactly as much as you should be burning. So they alternated 2 weeks and 2 weeks. And what they showed is that over time, these people lost more weight, experienced less adaptive thermogenesis. So they didn't have these, metabolic slowdowns to the same extent. And I think they actually had slightly better compliance within that diet.
Yeah.
And so you saw this study, or I saw the study, and I said, wow, this is amazing. How can we implement this? And my first thought is 33%. That's a lot. So for somebody eating 2,000 calories a day, you're now eating 1,333 calories a day. Like, that's hard. And realistically, unless you have a trained, like, literal lab technician checking in on you every day of the week and you're getting paid to do this, you're probably not going to follow that. And so he said, okay, what we can do is maybe modify this protocol. And so we have sort of what we call the M2 modified approach, where we just basically reduce the deficit down from 33% to a lower percentage. And then we basically said, instead of doing a 2 week deficit, 2 week metabolic maintenance, we're going to do 2 weeks of cutting, and then somewhere in the range of 1 week or so of metabolism restoration.
Right.
And I said, okay, at the end of the day, it ends up being not quite as much of calorie deficit over, say, 12 weeks, but it's pretty close. It's much more manageable. And so, that's where we start. We have a lot of iterations of that depending on who you are, right? So you might come to me and say, no way, 2 weeks, not happening. That's specifically for me. If I'm ever trying to lean out for something, yeah, I've got 7 days and then I need a break, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so we start with this basic template and then evolve again on an individual by individual basis.
Sure.
Feedback.
Yeah, that's great. I saw that study as well, and I really enjoyed reading it. There's one that was more recent, or in the same year. That was the ice cap trial, and it was 3 on, 1 off, and that was done in athletes, and they showed like a similar thing.
Yeah.
So as you said, it's just having those breaks from dieting to reduce the type of adaptive thermogenesis that will happen with dieting. I guess there's 2 questions that I brought out from that phase. So I'll go to the first one and then I'll double back to my second point. But you talked about how there'll be 2 reasons why people will not be making progress on low calories. And the first one is having that diet adapted thermogenesis. Yeah. So if you find this individual and they're like, I'm not binging on the weekend, I am compliant with this all the time, I'm not getting anywhere, is that then a case of let's just bump them straight back up to maintenance and you've just got to deal there for a while? Or do you reverse diet them? What would be your best practice?
Yeah, so scientifically, the best is just to push them back to their maintenance numbers, right?
Sure.
This has been shown to be the most effective way to restore the metabolic process, but there's some definite side effects, right? Mm-hmm. And so there will be some temporary weight gain for sure. That can definitely happen. And then 2, humans are not, lab animals. They're not mice. They're not rats. They have emotions. And when that happens, like that 3, 4, 5, pound, 10 pound or 5 kilo gain, that can be really hard to deal with. And now they're gone. Like they've lost faith in the process and they're back to dieting right away.
Yeah.
And the quote reverse dieting approach where you slowly build somebody back up, while it may not be the most effective way to actually restore somebody's metabolism, it actually might be the most effective way for that person to restore their metabolism.
Yeah.
And it's kind of coming down to this individual based through process. You've got to know your client and get to know them as fast as possible. If they're, just like an emotional and intellect, machine, and they're just like, nope, I got it. Like, I understand this is a process. Then like, we're going to jump you like 800 calories,
Yeah.
But if they're like wishy-washy on the process to begin with, and they're freaking out about eating more, well, then maybe we're going to like literally increase them by like 80 to 100 calories every 1 to 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Let them stabilize, let them see that everything's okay. Mm-hmm. If it's a woman, make sure that they go through like a menstrual cycle period, because they're going to gain weight during that phase, irrespective of what you do with their diet.
Yeah.
Let them see that that's not consistent, and then work with that person to get them to where they need to be,
Sure.
And secondly, of course, is just educate them, right? Tell them this is possible. This might happen. But at the end of the day, like, you're going to be okay. And listen, yeah.
Okay. So as you were saying, you were building people back up.
I was saying, sorry, before my internet, crapped out there. So, the other thing is just to educate people, right?
Yeah.
And let them know that this is going to be a part of the process, that, these things may happen and it's going to be okay. And like, we've done this before, and that, while their situation is unique, it's not so unique that they have to feel like they're the first person to go through this. Yeah. And oftentimes getting them to relax and exhale for a minute is super helpful, not just from a compliance point of view, but actually physiologically, right? Like, the brain is such a powerful thing that influences our hormones, that, getting that anxiety out of their head just actually allows for progress.
Yeah. Yeah, because that in itself, as you said, it produces the cortisol, which can spike up weight and play with your mind and bloat. And...
Oh man, like, we don't even begin to understand how impactful the mind is. So like, there's this really cool study that they did, where they gave a long story short. So they took this same group of people, and the first time they gave them this can of like supposedly like a low cal smoothie, and on the label it says diet and light and everything else, and they made them stare at the can for 10 minutes before they drank it.
Right.
And they drank it, and they said, well, how fulfilling was this can? And then they're like it was okay. And they measured their ghrelin levels, which is essentially like a hunger hormone, and they stay relatively like in the range of, hey, I'm still hungry. And so like 3 weeks later, they brought the same people back, and they gave them a can, and this one said vanilla milkshake in a can, right? And like high fat and all this, like the nutrients on it, 600 calories, and oh my god. And so they had them drink this, and they said, how full are you? And they said, oh my God, we're so full. And they looked at their ghrelin levels, and their ghrelin levels indicated that they were full. And it was the exact same shake bowl.
Yes. Yeah, of course it was.
Like the physiology, your literal hormones were influenced by what you read on this can and what you expected it to be. And so that's just an example of like, how impactful what you think is on who you are, right? On hormones that are going to be super important in compliance, on stress levels, on hunger, all of these things that ultimately are going to result in success or not success.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think, as you said, it's educating them on the process, and like saying, this might happen, but based on what you've told me, we'll do it slowly. And you've kind of got to buy them, I think, by showing examples of how it's worked in the past with other people as well, and then they're more likely to trust you and get out of that. It's like the cycle of chronic dieting, really, isn't it, that people get themselves stuck in?
Yeah, exactly. Like the binge restrict, mentality that generates guilt and shame and stuff. You can break that cycle. Like you're already in a winning place from there. So
yeah, definitely 100%. And then the second thing I was thinking of when we talked about then the Matador, the ice cap, and the idea of having regular breaks within a plan. How long would you then say that because we were talking about breaking up fat loss and then going into performance, right? So
right.
Would you say that the fat loss phase runs for as long as the person wants to be losing body fat for? Do you have a cutoff of the amount of weeks that you have? Because there's some literature to suggest, obviously, the longer it goes, the more you're going to risk muscle loss, things like that.
Yeah. So in general, those types of things are going to be, based upon results for me, right?
Okay.
So if we're seeing good progress with weight, loss and or fat loss more specifically, we'll continue. And then second to that is going to be just their competition season, right? So again, CrossFit has completely changed the landscape on us. There is no season anymore. And so, even within the world of, more recreational athletes doing competitions on weekends, they tend to want to do these things every 2 months or so. And so I'm going to say, yeah, okay, great. Leading into your 2-day throwdown, like I want 3 weeks of really solid eating because, or a month, because I want to make sure you're well fueled, your stress levels, are relatively low from a physiological point of view, never mind the mental aspects of having to cut weight. So all of these things come into account, but really, like at the end of the day, just following results, right? You'll see the slowdown happen. And then at that point, it's sort of like, okay, like it's time for a longer than 1 to 2 week break here. Like let's take a couple of months. Let's get some muscle mass growth going on. Let's let your body know that everything's cool and kosher. And then, if we want to come back to more weight loss than we really can, but it's time for a longer break now.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it. It's funny how you said like, oh, they want to do a throwdown every 2 months. I mean, over here, it's more like every week, especially when we hit the summer. There's
for sure, man. Yeah, you're not wrong. You are not wrong.
Yeah, the UK fitness, like I'm sure it is the same in the States. The fitness scene in terms of your local throwdowns, there's one in every town on every weekend, pretty much.
Yeah, if you want to compete every weekend, you definitely can make that happen. That's for sure.
Yeah, I guess if someone was doing that then through a summer, you'd definitely be like, look, you're technically in the season now, and
yeah, I mean,
we're not going to be going through a deficit there.
No. If somebody's trying to compete like literally every weekend, at that point, like weight loss is not their goal, right?
No.
Even that it is, like your actions are telling me something totally different. And so, you just got to bring that person back into alignment and say, yeah, I know you say you want to lean out, but your actions are telling me that you're competing every weekend. And so do you want to end up as a dumpster fire, or do you want to just, try to recover as much as we possibly can so you can go out and have fun and, and enjoy these competitions and stuff. So it's just aligning people's expectations with their actions essentially.
Yeah, because again, even when they're like, oh, but it's just a bit of fun, and I'm not taking it that seriously. It's like, oh, but you will.
Oh, I'm sure you're just going 85% on that floor, right? Yeah. The 4 workouts in 8 hours, exactly.
No, exactly. They never leave. It's something in the tank, which is the issue, I guess. Sure. And do you have to have that conversation with people then sometimes with regards to technically overtraining, and in terms of their nutrition? Do you say like, look, actually competing every weekend right now, it's not where you can be? And
100%, yeah, for sure. And so, like I said, the first thing you want to do is just educate them and say like, okay, the reason why you can't do a competition every weekend is because stress response, all the things that you're doing, like you're actually not really training anymore because you're taking 3 days off or lower volume. And so, we're not going to see that type of progress that you're looking for. And so, it's just, but like this happens with elite level people too, right? One of the highest level athletes I work with, like we just basically said, no, I don't think you should do that competition because it's not good for your overall goals, which are to perform at the CrossFit Games. Like let's back off. Let's get some training going. Let's let your body recover. Sure enough, they got sick, and so all the signs that a longer break was needed from competing were all there.
Yeah.
And so it's not even recreational athletes. It's everybody, right? Like you've got this bug, you enjoy it. It's a drug. It's addictive going out there and competing and having people cheer for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, having somebody that's independent from that process, that's removed from that, to kind of help you with those logical decisions can be just so impactful and powerful on your overall progress, right? And ultimately, most people aren't just going out there to compete and have fun for the sake of it. They want to do that, but they also want to get better over time, right? So they might be going out there not expecting to win a competition, but they want to come back, to that same competition the next year and lift more weight or do the workouts faster and have us better placing. Or, even with the CrossFit Open, right? Just continue to see their name, a little bit higher every single year. And if you're just competing all the time, that's not going to happen, right? You have to have a training base too.
Yeah, they do. And I think that's what you said there, actually, with the change of the season, taking out regionals and putting in sanctionals, which are now independently run. Yep. As an athlete, if you are looking at that, you have to be very clever with how you design your season, because you need to give yourself a chance to qualify if that's your goal. But then it's a case of actually you need time to train in between these sanctionals, and you need time to rest, and because you can't just hit one after another and pray.
It's really, really hard for the that mid to upper echelon athlete that's trying to qualify for those things, because it's not just the competitions, it's the qualifiers, right? So sure, there was the CrossFit Open that I think qualified for something like 15 of them, we'll say, but there's another whole pile of them that have their own qualifiers. And if you're constantly doing those workouts, which are essentially the same sort of mentality and stress level as a CrossFit Open workout, at some point, like you're always competing, right? And so there's no down period, and it's really interesting to see a sport with no real off season, right?
Yeah.
I'll maintain that one of the smartest things and one of the reasons why Matt Fraser is so freaking good is that after the games every year, he takes a month off.
Yep.
He doesn't touch a barbell. He goes to a lake for 2 weeks and eats Cinnabons and stuff. And he unplugs and he lets his body recover for a month. And I don't know if they're doing that. They all assume that they're going to fall behind and lose progress. And so of course Matt's a unique case, and probably not a great idea to just rely exclusively on what he's doing, but we can learn something from a guy who's willing to take a month, 1/12 of his year off.
Yeah, because it's learning from actual other sports, right? Yeah. And it's actually taking this is what we have in terms of science of strength and conditioning research, and we know that there needs to be different phases of training, and one of those phases is the deload, especially after a competition period, depending on the length of the competition, and that's essentially what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right.
He's just taking a massive deload, and as you said, nutrition-wise, technology-wise, he just goes out and just does absolutely nothing.
I think he eats to calorie excess.
But and that's actually a really good point, talking about Matt Fraser, because there are a lot of people that will assume that they need to be shredded lean to perform really well, and actually, I'm not calling Matt Fraser fat at all, because obviously he's got visible abs. He's an amazing athlete in great shape, but he isn't as lean as other CrossFit athletes. But he doesn't care because he's performing better.
Yeah, I mean, that's all genetically based, right? So we post about this, but Alan Aragon had one as well. Menno Henselmans talks about this, and it's the distribution of subcutaneous versus visceral fat is genetically predetermined, right?
Yeah.
And Matt or Mackenzie Riley, who I work with, or somebody like that, they just carry more of their adipose tissue subcutaneously, right? And that's genetics, right? You're not going to change that. And for Matt to drop that to a level where he looks like somebody I don't know, Street Horner, or I don't know who, another super to get to that, that's going to be bad for his performance, right? Like he would have to go to a body level that's deleterious to his body, to his performance, to look a certain way. And luckily, for him, he doesn't have that mentality. He's able to push it aside. Like I'm sure he would love to have better definition, like any human being does, but his desire to win is like 1,000-fold, 1,000,000-fold greater. And so it's not even a debate in his head anymore,
Yeah. And I guess it's having that conversation with clients who want to look leaner, isn't it? I guess it's like, actually sometimes genetically it might cost you more to get leaner. And if you have goals of performing well in the gym or in your local throwdowns or further than that,
sacrifices that you're going to have to make to your life, right?
Yeah.
Like, forget performance and stuff like that. For somebody to get to, let's say, like, sub 10% for a male, sub 15% for a female that doesn't have like blessed genetics, you're not eating out at restaurants anymore. You're controlling all of your meals. You're 8.5 hours per night. You're probably not even training CrossFit as your main modality at this point. It's probably more lower stress bodybuilding, focusing on, getting 10 to 12,000 steps per day as like your NEAT, and then like you're giving up so much to get to this thing that probably ultimately won't be sustainable anyway, and, that's a hard conversation for people to have, because they just like, Instagram is out there and it's like, you're not comparing yourself to the people that are closest to you in your life anymore. You're literally comparing yourself to the entire freaking universe. I recently heard from a mentor sort of mine, he's like, what does the phrase keeping up with the Joneses mean? Right? Like, what did that mean 30 years ago? Well, those are your neighbors, those are the people that you compared yourself to. And that's what generated sort of your relative place in the world and sort of determined your level of success and happiness. And now it's like all you see on social media is freaking 8-packs and people traveling the world and having these glorious meals all the time. And you're like, holy shit, my life sucks, right? Like, total bullshit. PRing all day long, and that comparison game is just brutal. It's just brutal on mentality, And so helping people to understand that like there's this middle ground where, you can lose weight, you can be happy, you can be healthy, but you don't have to give up your entire life, is sort of like where the sweet spot lies. And that goes back to like literally one of the first things we talked about, which is like, what do? We try to generate happiness. And to some extent, like you're saying you do the same thing, which is helping people recalibrate like what they have to give up. And it's a lot to get to something that's ultimately not sustainable and probably won't actually make them very happy at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's the key point at the end, isn't it? As you said, it's what's the trade-off to your life to achieve a body composition, and will it actually improve your quality of life and your happiness? Because, as you said,
I can think of so very few people who got like afterwards, like going through that whole process, getting to this like shredded point, that were happy. I know a lot of people that got to that point ended up miserable and ended up with eating disorders, and then had to come find somebody like us to help repair themselves, sort of like that. That's a shame, right? And this comes back, we were all talking to, it's sort of like, where does this desire come from? I don't know, but it's something that as a bigger community as a whole, we're trying to work on by getting to people to focus on like perform, right? So like perform in life, perform in the gym, perform at work, perform at home, focus on what your body can do. And even at a deeper level, focus on who you are, because who you are has intrinsic value, regardless, right? And you can express that through things like fitness, but other ways in your life as well,
Yeah. It's understanding your mid-ground point of how happy are you? Like, what's the best contrast, I guess, between lifestyle, performance, body composition, happiness, and then you've got to find that level for you.
Completely. You're exactly right.
No, great. Well, Mike, I think that pretty much covers everything.
For sure. It's a good place to end, for sure.
I thought so. That's why I chose it. So where can people go to find more about you and the company?
Yeah, for sure. So the best place to find us is through our website. So m2performancenutrition.com. Instagram page is the exact same thing. And then I have my own personal page where I toss up some more scientific-y type stuff. which is just Mike _ so yeah, those are the 3 best places to find things about us and who we are and what we're all about.
Cool. I'll link those up in the description. So Mike, thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, this has been a blast. This is definitely one of the funnest ones I've done for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.